I'm the state representative for the 52nd House District. So that encompasses Chelsea, Dexter, Saline, Manchester, and then the entire northern border, so Whitmore, Lake, and Salem Township. So 14 of the 20 townships here in Washtenaw County. So each House District at the state level, there's 110 House of Representatives in the House of Representatives, and we each represent about 90,000 people. So if you think about Washtenaw County, 14 of the 20 townships have 90,000 people. The other 6 townships have 3 representatives. So in that other area of 6 townships, there are 270,000 people. So that's basically the city limits of Ann Arbor and the city limits of Ypsilanti, and then the townships that encompass their borders. So when we are in the 52nd House District, when we are in western and northern Washtenaw County, with 90,000 people spread out over 14 townships versus 270,000 people in 6 townships, our concerns, our needs, the things that are important to us, the reason we chose to live in an area where there's 90,000 people spread out in 14 townships can be very different than the issues that are in those 6 townships and in the city limits of Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti. And so it's really important that we come together as a community and talk about what are our specific needs. So with that, now that I've got everybody quiet and made the general introduction, we're all here. We'll take a moment just to complain about our roads. A really slippery time getting here. Okay, I was on Old US 12, and all of a sudden I was like, whoa! I was like heading into the other lane. So hopefully when we leave here, maybe it will break the barrier where SALT starts working again. So I'm really glad to see all of you here this morning, and we're filling up a lot of chairs. I know we were getting a little bit anxious with the weather if we were going to have folks coming out, so I really appreciate the effort that you've made. So a little bit of housekeeping, and then we'll jump into this. This is an open public legislative meeting. With your consent, the video camera is pointed this way. We're going to videotape this morning. Is that okay with everybody? Okay. At the end, we will have a question and answer, kind of, come ask a question. At that point, the camera may turn to you. If you want to ask a question and do not want to be on videotape, just give me some kind of sign, and we will not turn the video camera on you while you are asking your question. So if there's any kind of discomfort you have with that, feel free just to give some kind of signal, and we'll do that. This is not that important that I'm going to ask you to turn off your phones. So we'll let that go. All right. So I have been in office. January 11th was my 1 year to swearing in and beginning the job of the legislative session a year ago. At that time, this was actually the first place that we had a town hall. It was here in the McCune room at the Chelsea Library. And we started off with an easy town hall. We said, okay, we want to have these town halls where we have panels, we have experts, and we're covering topics. And we started off with one just on parks and recs and trails, just to get our feet wet, kind of set the precedent that we're going to engage in civil discourse, we're going to share income wants and desires, and we're going to come together and voice ideas and opportunities from different perspectives. Over the year, we went and we tackled then some tougher issues. We tackled healthcare, we tackled some budget, we tackled energy accessibility. And so tonight, I'm sorry, it's been a long week for me, I'm going to be honest. I was on the road I was saying to a couple folks, I had to be in Grand Rapids on Friday morning by 8 a.m. And so Steve Thalen, who some of you may know, former president of the Washtenaw Farm Bureau Association and current president of the Michigan Association of Fairs, was at the convention there, and he had asked me to participate on a panel for him. And I really worked very hard not to disappoint people. So I did my postman impression, and I went through the rain, the sleet, the snow, the freezing rain to get to my destination on time. So that's taken a little bit out of me, to be honest. And then to come back again. So what we are going to be talking about today is a lot of what we heard knocking doors. So how many of you have had either myself or you were at home and a piece of literature from myself or my team on your door at some point? Okay. So believe it or not, since I took office, along with Becca, who works with me, and Ryan, who is also at the front desk, since I took office, we've knocked on 12,317 doors. With the simple question, what is important to you that I focus on in Lansing? Okay? So we have all kinds of information that we have gathered, that we have directly knocked on folks' doors. You might have had something on your door that had a little rip-off postcard that says, hey, what are your priorities? Send them to me. Folks send them to me. They do. Folks show up at the town halls and the coffee hours. And one of the things that I'm hearing as I'm going from neighborhood to neighborhood, as Becca's organizing events and working on things with me, is concerns from folks about housing. They have a child in college, like I do. I said goodbye to 2 of my sons this morning to send them back to college. They want their I'm going to say kid, young adult, to come back from college and live, but there's really not kind of an affordable apartment for them to pick up. And they don't really want to come live at home when they're done with college. We heard from young families who want to stop renting and move into a starter home. But the pricing of housing is pretty high right now, and it's hard for young families to find starter homes. We heard from our school communities that they want more young families in the schools. We've heard from empty nesters who are in larger homes, who want a home with a little bit less maintenance, still want to be very independent, don't want to move into an assisted living, but would like to find a home that's affordable, but that requires less work and less care. And so we were hearing about, kind of these different needs that folks have around housing. And what we started thinking about was just the diversity of the housing mix that's available to members of our community. And we were very grateful when Jane Pacheco reached out to us and said, hey, let's have a broader conversation about this. And so that's what this morning represents, is that idea of a conversation in a community of what does it look like? How do we attract and make sure that we have places for our young people to return home to, that we have places for young families to grow, and that we have places for folks who do the work of our community, who work in our restaurants, who work in our stores, who own small businesses, who are starting out as young entrepreneurs. How do we make sure that we have housing opportunities for every aspect of our community through retirement and through making sure that you can stay in place and still live in your community? And so what's important about today is I know a lot of the faces in this room, and what I'm really excited about is there are a lot of faces in this room that I don't know. Because what we want to make sure is that we're not always hearing from the same voices, that we're hearing from different people with new perspectives, with different perspectives. So I'm hoping this morning that we have folks who are renting here, folks who are starting families here, folks who are working in Chelsea and would like to live in Chelsea, folks who are working in Dexter and would like to be able to be really close and be engaged in Dexter schools. So we want to make sure that we're talking about the diversity in Western Washtenaw County. So with that, we are going to kick off a panel. Do most of you have an agenda? Of some sort? Okay. So we will pass, you can hand those to Becca, and Becca will pass out a few more you can share just so you can get the gist of it. I'm one of those people who always wants to know what's going to happen next. So we'll get those out. So on our community panel today, I'm going to go through and just say who they are, and then they will give an introduction, and each person will have about 5 minutes. Becca's going to grab a couple more agendas, and she'll be right back. So we have Trin Pfeiffer, who's the Executive Director of the Chelsea Senior Center. We have Nancy Paul, the Director of Faith in Action. We have Reverend Joseph Jeffries from First Congregational Church of Chelsea, and we have Jane Pacheco, Chelsea City Council member. And Interfaith Council for Peace and Justice is her day job, as many of us combine service and employment. So thank you so much, and with that, I'm going to kick it off to Trin.
Thank you, everybody. I'm going to stand up so that it makes me feel a little taller. I'm the director of the Senior Center. So we are housed in this building, and our mission is to enhance the quality of life and well-being of older adults in our community. So right now we support over 1,000 members who participate in our center to participate in programs and activities that encourage healthy aging. So I was asked to join this panel to talk about senior trends and to see what we're seeing in our community in terms of housing diversity for seniors. So I have a few slides, because many of you know that I do love numbers. So just overall, many of us already know that we are facing, and we're in the midst of an aging demographic shift, right? It's not coming, we're actually already in it. So we are at a crossing point now, globally, where we know that the aging population by the end of this decade people who are 65 and over will start to exceed the number of individuals who are 5 and under. So that crossing point means that that demographic shift will have great impact in our community in terms of the resources that will be needed. Other research and studies show that about 10,000 baby boomers are retiring every day. That's huge. So all of this has an impact on what we do as a senior center, but more importantly, what it means for our community on so many levels, including housing. I don't know if you can see those numbers very well, but that shift is even more dramatic in our Chelsea community. So Washtenaw County right now is about 12.5% of the population is 65 and over. For Chelsea, that's actually almost 26%. That's twice as high as the county average is. And a lot of that is driven by the retirement communities that we have here. But senior housing is not just about senior retirement communities, because when seniors are surveyed, about 95% or more of our members and our seniors say that they actually want to age in place, meaning they want to stay in their own homes and live independently. So the senior housing communities here in Chelsea do drive up that population, but our population is also just aging. We're seeing that in Chelsea dramatically. And then when it comes to seniors and the level of poverty, all of this data came from Washtenaw County Public Health. So at 100% of poverty level, that's about less than $1,000 a month. The number of seniors who are at 200% of poverty level, which is just under $2,000 a month per individual, that's when you start to qualify for subsidized housing. Okay? That map shows you right there. So here's Chelsea. We're actually at about 19 to 18% of our seniors are actually living at 200% of poverty or higher. The areas that are red on the map that you see here are the areas that are even higher than Chelsea, in the 26 to 30%. So when we think of Chelsea, MLI published an article recently about the median income rising. A lot of people think Chelsea is a very wealthy community, but many of our seniors are living at 200% of poverty levels or lower. So what does that mean in terms of the context of housing, the trends that we see? When we talk about housing diversity, we're not just talking about more housing so that more people can move into Chelsea. We're talking about being able to support our current citizens as their shift and phases in life change. So we see at the Senior Center more seniors needing help and resources to be able to move from the rural townships and farms that they've lived on for all of their lives into town. So as they want to move into town because of better access to services, transportation, easier access to doctors, errands, that means that there's not enough housing, or the housing prices are so high that it becomes unaffordable for people to make that shift in their life, to be able to move from the country to where they can get better resources. The other trend that we see is that seniors want to downsize. Obviously, they don't necessarily need as big of a house, as big of a yard. So that means that the condos in town become really high. There's a high demand for them. There's often a waiting list if they ever even make it on the market. And I don't know if any of you have seen the condo prices lately, but that's because there's more seniors needing to downsize. And then lastly, we know that senior housing is an important issue, but again, senior housing, when people hear that, they think that it's about retirement communities. But senior housing is really about the desire to age in place, but to be able to do that safely and connected to our resources. So that has a huge impact on what we are trying to talk about today, which is housing diversity, to be able to take care of our current citizens who have different changes in their life right now. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nancy.
I think I'll just buck the trend and boost up in my seat a little bit. So then everybody else doesn't feel obligated to stand up too. For those of you who don't know, and I think probably most people do, Faith in Action is kind of what we refer to in the business as a safety net organization. We raise our funds almost entirely locally, with an annual budget of somewhere around $300,000. we actually mobilize another close to $750,000 in in-kind gifts in the form of food, clothing, Christmas and seasonal donations, cars, all of that. So that really, that even as a business, we have probably over $1 million impact on the local economy of Chelsea and Dexter. What we've seen over the course of the years, and I'm just going to shout out that our social worker Doug Smith is in the audience, and if he has anything to correct me on or to add to what I'm saying, because he really handles the nitty-gritty of what it means to help people with housing in this community. We currently, especially this really escalated over the course of the recession, but we currently have over 220 households in Chelsea and Dexter that have actually engaged with us as an agency and have used services from us at some level. Again, we use that same kind of measure at 200% of the federal poverty level is what people is kind of the benchmark for what it means to kind of be considered low income in our communities. Below that level, you can also qualify for free or reduced school lunch and qualify for food like from food gatherers or any of the other broader agencies, and it's the measure that we use to qualify for services at Faith in Action. But Doug and I would both tell you that really many of the people that we serve are really way closer to 100% of the federal poverty level, which is a really shockingly low income for this area. What we've seen over the course of the last 8 to 10 years is kind of an increasing situation where people's resources are becoming increasingly, embedded into their housing costs. The last actual survey we did was quite a few years ago, and at that time, our clients spent an average of 53% of their income on their housing. We really believe even, to get a number that low is even based on the fact that at that time many people were living with family members and paying no rent. We've seen that really escalate now, where we're seeing lots and lots of doubling up with young families with their parents and other family members, sometimes split up across households. And probably, we don't have an actual number, but I'm quite certain that most of the people we serve are spending well over 60% of their income on their housing. What happens in that kind of a situation is that, increasingly, you know that your primary, task is to keep the roof over your head. Your, utilities slide, the upkeep on your vehicle slide, activities for your children slide, your ability to keep food on the table slides. And what we're seeing is an increasing escalation of these other problems that then results in people just bailing, moving out, finding some other place to live, and leaving our communities. Their children leave our schools. Their children are having to leave, a school district where parents have really found a lot of support, around even their issues of poverty. They will tell you that the school district in both Dexter and Chelsea, that there are so many supports there as if you are a low-income family, because the schools do such an amazing job of zeroing in on kids and their needs and their skills and really working to really help the families that are struggling. Once you leave this community and go to a much poorer community, a lot of times people end up feeling, sort of abandoned and struggling. A big part of what we identify as the problem here, though, is that the safety net in any community is very localized. So once low-income families start to leave our communities, Faith in Action only operates in Chelsea and Dexter. And once the poor people leave our communities, they're ending up in communities that are much poorer, that have a much smaller ability to raise funds for their own safety net activities. And really, I think what we're going to see over time, from a much bigger perspective, from a much bigger picture perspective, is that this economically disadvantaged population is going to get increasingly isolated and with less access to safety net services like agencies like Faith in Action provide. We are not public policy people, we're social workers. We tend to really identify with our people and their needs. So, we're not here to, say exactly what we believe the answers are, but we've worked hard to develop partnerships, and again, Avalon Housing is in the room to kind of facilitate some relationships that have actually borne some fruit, in that we are, working to get, one building in Chelsea that's going to generate 17 new units of affordable housing, and that's been kind of a long and arduous but ultimately very satisfying process. That's again going to address the needs for kind of the lowest of the low income. That doesn't necessarily address the needs of what we also see among, the lower earners, with families. So, we understand that there's a real need for, for lots of things. We're here to not just talk about kind of the overall what it means for people to be economically disadvantaged, but around housing needs, we really recognize that there's issues of density and zoning and planning and all of those things, and we're here certainly to support that. I would just really like to say, and this was, something that could have gone in the testimonials, could have gone in here, but, from where we sit, we really deal with people and their emotional reality and what it means to be, to really suffer. And one of the things that I just was going to roll in is just the way that it feels, what it means to live with a level of stress about your own ability to support yourself and to live in this community. But our one friend wrote this. She said, "I'll write to anyone who cares to know why the issue of affordable housing and the treatment of the poor in Chelsea is just so much confetti and self-applause. The heart of Chelsea doesn't want to accept those that cannot fight the prejudice and bigotry of the powers that exist in Chelsea to exclude them. High rents and only very limited, deplorable rentals show clearly to anyone seeking affordable housing in Chelsea, those working in the service industries, the restaurants and stores, those in minimum wage jobs, and the disabled, that they are not welcomed." And that's the way it feels. That's the way it feels if you're one of those people. That's the reality we work with, and that's some solutions we hope to see.
Thank you, Nancy. And welcome on behalf of the diverse faith community we have here in this city. Mike's on.
Closer. Get closer.
It's on.
Get closer.
Oh, get closer? As you can see, I'm hearing impaired, and I can hear within a few feet of my head pretty well, but other than that, I'm out of contact. But on behalf of all the clergy, the pastors, and everybody in this community, and the leaders of our churches, thank you for this opportunity. And as pastors and clergy in this community, one of the roles that we play is helping people develop a relationship with God and Jesus Christ, but also putting into practice God's plan for humankind and to live God's plan in the way that we live out our lives. And throughout Scripture, we are reminded about God's plan. And one of God's plans is setting people free and reaching out to the oppressed and those who are enslaved and the people who live on the margins in the world. And we can't help but see in Scripture, too, how God spoke to those people who were delivered out of the oppressions of the world, and especially the Exodus people. In Deuteronomy, it says, "You shall also love the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt." God reminding people that where they came from and to welcome the stranger in their life. And Jesus had a message in the New Testament also, and it's that one of "come and follow me," and a message of welcoming. And at the end of the book of Matthew, Jesus tells us how we need to be welcoming to the less fortunate in this world. The hungry, the thirsty, the naked, the sick, the imprisoned. And when I was a stranger, you invited me into your home. The least of these, those on the margins in our society. God offers a plan, a master plan, and it's a pretty good one. And I know community leaders in this city and local communities and townships around us are working on master plans. And my prayer is that they can implement God's plan into the community in which we live. We are blessed this weekend to be celebrating one of our country's greatest, as I consider, leaders, in Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who had a dream that involved opportunities. Opportunities for folks, despite the color of your skin, how much money you made, what your gender was, or where you were born. Opportunity. That's one of the problems that we have in the community that we live. Lack of opportunity for people who are perhaps trying to find a first-time home. This week at our Clergy Ministerial Association, we had the joy of having Habitat Humanity come and visit us and talk about the celebrations and the joy that they have had in working in our community, but also the lack of resources. Not a lack of resources from people to come and help, but a lack of resources of, quite frankly, our community and our county has run out of houses that they can actually rehab. There aren't anymore. They have to pretty much rely on now new builds. And the opportunity for these people who live on the margins for first-time home buyers or established homes and families in our community is extremely limited. And as a pastor, and I know some of our pastors and clergy are in this room today, some of the things I hear make me celebrate and enjoy. The people are here in this room. But I also hear things that are extremely painful. Just this week, I had a conversation with someone about this very issue. And the response that I got, and this is one of the first time I've had it when we talk about the lack of affordable housing, fine, we don't want them here. Let them go to Jackson. That's painful. That's not God's plan. My wife and I, who is in this room right now, are very fortunate. We grew up north of here in Howell and Brighton. And I love Chelsea too. But if you go into those communities, just on the outskirts of town, there's rows and rows and rows of houses that were built in the 1950s and 60s. 3-bedroom ranches, some with basements, all looking alike. And it was our dream to raise our family in one of those homes. And when we moved to Brighton from Howell, we bought our first home, living the dream, 12 by 60 feet, a manufactured home. But we were striving, we wanted to live the dream and have one of those homes. And after a few years, eventually, we were blessed to get into one of those 3-bedroom ranches. Worked with a lot of sweat equity to rebuild it and paint it and clean it up. And after about 5 years, we sold it. And we bought one of those cool old houses on Main Street in the downtown city of Brighton. Spent 25 years raising our family and rebuilding that house and working in the community. My wife served she had a daycare business in the house, and most of her clients were teachers in our school system. And there were over 70 kids that came through our house. And the teachers knew each day when they dropped their kids off, they were going to be safe. I served the community in many different ways in the city. Coached youth baseball, youth football, coached high school football at the high school level. And we loved where we lived. But there was something lacking in my life at that point, and I decided to pursue ministry. God had called me to serve His people in many different ways. And I went back to school, got my degree, and I was fortunate enough to have been called to First Congregational Church right here in Chelsea, Michigan. And as you go through the call process, you have to do this time where you're doing all the negotiations and it comes down to housing and everything. And we started talking housing, this blank look came over the panel that was interviewing me. And they informed me about the availability of affordable housing in the Chelsea area. And we moved to this area, but we rented a home at first. But now we bought a home about 3 years ago in Dexter Township, in Gregory mailing address, in Chelsea School District. They were right. Despite my wife working at full-time in youth ministry and me having a full-time job, we couldn't afford to live in the community that we were called to serve. There are many people on the margins in this world and in this community who also have a dream. My plan is, or my prayer is, that we can implement God's plan. Work together with cities and townships and create spaces where dreams can become realities for the least of these and those who live on the margins in our community.
Thank you very much. I'm handing that off to Jane, if you don't
Jane?
mind. Thank you. That's a powerful story.
Okay, hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
We had invited some business owners, employers in the community to come and give their perspective, and they're working. But we did get a letter testimonial, and at this point I'm going to ask Rick Catherman has agreed to read the letter from Chris Martinson. He's the owner of the Chelsea Ale House Brewery.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. This is, again, as Jane mentioned, this is from Chris Martinson from the Ale House. He apologizes. He says, I won't be able to make it on Saturday, but I wanted to share something with you about my experience here in Chelsea. He says, we've been open for 5 years, and in that time, very few people who work for us actually live in Chelsea. There have been a few, and primarily they are in their early 20s and living with their parents. The main reason is the low availability of housing in general in Chelsea. And then the housing that is available is not affordable or suited to families. There has been only one time in my memory, in Chris's memory, that employees worked for us and then moved to Chelsea and split a rental house 3 or 4 ways. Our employees generally live in Ypsilanti. Many have lived in Scioto Farms trailer community, but they have changed how they lease, and many folks had to move out. We also have had multiple employees from Jackson and Stockbridge. I've been hearing from my employees that even Ypsilanti is now becoming too expensive for rental apartments. If there were more reasonable and rental options for our general employee demographic, which is 21 to 30, ages 21 to 30, it would allow us to retain employees, but also make Chelsea a more vibrant community and potentially keep those people in town as they grow older and have their own families. One additional note, as I travel around the state to beer events, some as close as Ann Arbor and Jackson, I generally find that people don't know where Chelsea is. Even people in Ann Arbor think it's far away. Right? For people who don't already have a connection with Chelsea, they might remember going to a really good restaurant one time. Or that Jeff Daniels is from here. I feel like Chelsea has a lot to offer younger people with our growing mix of downtown businesses, especially those into outdoor recreation, being so close to the Waterloo Rec area and new bike trails. And that's signed Chris Martinson of the Chelsea Ale House.
Here, Jane. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, I'm Jane Pacheco, and I grew up in Chelsea, graduated from Chelsea High School, went to U of M, and after that, immediately moved out of state. I lived in Atlanta for a little bit, and I lived in Denver for about 10 years before the normal things happen, and you get married and think, the normal for me, you get married and think about having a family, and we moved back here. When I was pregnant with my first child. And we've lived here now for about 14 years. I have been on the Chelsea City Council for just over 4 years. I started in 2013, and like Donna said, my day job is I'm social justice advocacy for a nonprofit called the Interfaith Council for Peace and Justice. My interest in housing, and the reason that this is so important to me, is that where we live and how we live is probably one of the biggest decisions we make in our lives, and everyone makes it. The decision impacts every single one of us, all ages, all races, all classes, all religions. All of us live somewhere. In our council meetings, and I want to be clear that we're sitting in Chelsea. But this really is an issue, like Donna said, Western Washtenaw, Middle America, Midwest. This is a big issue. in our council meetings, we have a lot of conversation about what the vision for our community should look like. We have conversation about what we like about the existing community, present day, but it's our job really to look into the future and say, what things do we need to do now to preserve our way of life and to make it better in the future? I'm sure this process is the same in Dexter Township or the state meetings and Manchester, the village. We have processes in place to sort of help facilitate that conversation. Sometimes, and I know you all, have been aware of all of these things, community surveys, feedback inputs, charrettes, there's planners in the room. We ask for feedback on master plans, on park plans, on transit plans, on, any kind of plan out there. We ask for feedback, and it's important to get that feedback. So these meetings and discussions and votes and whatnot are held to help solidify sort of the vision that the community would like to see, not just the 4 people sitting at the table, but us all. So the feedback's important in the formal ways, but it's also important in the everyday ways, like the email to Donna or me or the Planning Commission. It's important that if you have a comment, to come and spend 5 minutes at a public comment portion of a council meeting or a Planning Commission meeting. If we don't hear from everyone, how can we even try to address the needs or the future hopes that we don't hear? So for me, when I think about community, it isn't necessarily defined by the border of the city of Chelsea or the city of Dexter or the village of Manchester. It's not even necessarily defined by the line on the map that says where the school district is, right? Or the district of Washtenaw County. Like, how do we decide, between Chelsea and Grass Lake, Washtenaw County, Jackson County? What it means is, and this is what I feel, but also it's informed by what you're telling me, is that we live and we think of where we live in terms of who are our neighbors, where are our neighborhoods, where do we shop, where do we gather, where do we go to dinner or coffee, where do we work, where do we go to school, where do we go to the library, where to the senior center, where do we volunteer? This is not necessarily defined on a map, this sense of community. It's all of these things associated. But, when decision makers, when the people you elect sit down to make decisions about challenges and solutions, they have to think about them in a mapped way, because there's, there are different jurisdictions, there's different municipalities, there's budgets, and they have to think about them with all of these sort of multiple layers of decision making. So this conversation we're having today isn't really about the nuts and bolts of who can make what decision and how much is it going to cost and how do we do it, because that's a tough nut to crack. But this is about kind of identifying what some of the needs are in Chelsea, Dexter, Manchester, Saline, Western Washtenaw, and then hearing some hopeful alternative options about how we can address those needs in a way that we can all see fitting into our community. And looking at these possibilities as part of the vision for our community. So both in my day job and in my city council position, I hear from people regularly about the challenges. Regular people, like you and me, and on the spectrum. I hear from business owners like Chris and Aubrey about how much they love doing business in the community, but how hard it is to retain employees. Even Howdy Homes, right? I don't know how many of you saw the fall issue of the Community Observer. So I don't know what's on the cover of it, but it came out October, November, and the quote from Howdy here, it's a long article about with unemployment falling, it's easier to find a job, making living is still a challenge, right? So his quote was, back in 1887, all of our employees would have lived locally, but now they can't afford to. He estimates that only 26 or 27 Jiffy Mixers have addresses in Washtenaw County. Chelsea, he says, needs, quote, more affordable housing. It's not a criticism, it's just a fact. So employers are addressing this conversation. We heard from Trin about seniors wanting to age in place and stay in their own homes. We heard from Nancy about affordability and how important it is for people to be able to stay in this community. We heard from Joe about the moral imperative, about providing housing, access, and opportunity. We'll hear more from individuals in this community sharing their particular stories about working. We are talking about our community, our teachers, our firefighters, our healthcare workers, the 20-somethings, the seniors, all of these people that are shifting in their life. We all have different needs at different times. And there are many different faces of these housing challenges, and there are many different options to address these different needs. So I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to be having this conversation and helping to determine what the future of this community, our community, could look like in a way that addresses all of its residents. I thank you for being here. In terms of the logistics for the next portion, I know Donna's on the ready for this, but we do have some prepared testimonials. I'm going to hand it off to her. And for those of you who are reading prepared testimonials, if you could come up and speak from here, we'd like to get it on tape. There is on the agenda a number of folks that I might not have touched base with this morning, but if your name's on the agenda and you'd like to speak your piece now, please do that. There will be a portion of time after Teresa's presentation where we'll have we'll have questions and answers, and we'll also have time to hear other stories. But for right now, this is prepared testimonials, right?
And I'm circling the same ones that you have there, so that's who's speaking. I got it.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you.
All right.
So thank you very much. And I'm going to have you right here. So I just want to say one thing really quick. We've come to a point in our society where sometimes words don't mean what they mean anymore and are code words for something else. So I want us to be very clear that the word affordable housing is not the same and it encompasses but is not equivalent to low-income housing. Okay, so I want us to be very clear about that. That our conversation here today is a broad conversation about folks who are on the lower end of income, who are at 100 or 200% of poverty, and making sure that they continue to be part of our community. That it's about the young family, that it's about our kid who just finished college and wants to come back, hopefully, and live in our community. It's about the young family. It's about the newly single mother or father who needs to be able to stay in the community and keep their kids in school. It's about the seniors who want to remain in their community and are ready for an assisted living. God willing, they never have to and are able to age in place. So that's what this conversation is about, and I want us to be very clear about that. I am really excited about this portion of the program. So this is some of the new faces to me, and some of the prepared testimony that we're going to be hearing. So let's, again, code word, prepared, does not mean that someone's been told what to say. It means that they have come ready to give you a story, ready to tell you their perspective, and have taken a moment to be thoughtful about what they want to share with you. So I have not heard any of these testimonies. I'm very excited to hear them. At the end of our program, when we have question and answers, if you have a story you would like to share, we would be, that will be the time for that. These are going to be about 1 to 2 minutes in that range. We're going to try and keep it there and move forward. So has this been some good information and some good perspective so far? Yes. Okay, good. So let's move forward with Joanne, and thank you very much for your courage.
They're not in order.
Oh, they're not in order. So I'm sorry, you are. Introduce yourself.
My name is Megan Massey.
Well, there we go.
But I am reading Aubrey Martinson's testimonial because she cannot be here today.
No, it's Shayla.
Shayla. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm reading Shayla's. Thank you, Jake.
Yeah.
So, again, my name is Megan Massey-Minnock. I'm reading Shayla's testimonial. She could not be here. So, starts. I believe that Western Washtenaw County could use more community-focused, multi-generational housing diversity for a few different reasons. I, personally, drive over 2 hours each day to be able to work in Chelsea. It is a wonderful community that I love being part of. However, the housing is simply too expensive for most of my coworkers and me. To directly compare, I currently pay $700 per month for a 2-bedroom apartment with a large yard and all utilities are included. On the other hand, most of the apartments I looked at in Chelsea were 1-bedrooms for at least $850 with no to little yard space, utilities were not included, and they were absolutely tiny in comparison. Another example would be the flats downtown. For the same size apartment in Chelsea versus Hillsdale, a downtown apartment above a business in Chelsea is $1,400 per month versus $375 per month in Hillsdale. While Chelsea does offer a great amount of community events, I feel that this is simply not feasible for most people my age. I am 28 and truly love my job at the Chelsea Ale House Brewery, so I make it work. I fear, however, that there are many people my age that could bring a youthful and innovative outlook to the community that simply can't because of their financial situations. I worked at the City Hall of Big Rapids and found that having a different perspective for most of my coworkers had a huge impact on creating new and extended community events and modern policies. Hopefully this all can be improved and Chelsea can become a place for all ages and classes to call home instead of consisting mostly of wealthy business owners.
Thank you. So one of the things that I wanted to point out too is this is not a conversation we would have been having 8 to 10 years ago, right? This is a conversation we're having because Chelsea is doing very well. Because the national economy is rebounding. We're doing better in Michigan. We're reaching full employment. Now, some of that is because some folks are working 2 and 3 jobs. And we have to work on our living wage and the quality of the employment. But we're reaching very low levels of employment. And this is where we are because things are going well. And so while we're having this conversation, I always want to have in the back of our mind that this is happening and is part of because we have done a good job in Western Washington County. We've done a good job in Chelsea. We've done a good job in our communities, making sure that we are thriving communities. And so this is really something that happens because we are, at some level, very successful in having good schools, good communities, and strong employment. And so we need to make sure as we move forward that our path is inclusive of all of our community members. So.
Hi, my name is Janet Curris. I am speaking in behalf of Danette. This is her housing testimonial. She was unable to attend. I have a young family of 4. My fiance and I live in Jackson, but we both drive a decent distance to work. I work here in Chelsea and he works in Wixom. We have thought about moving this direction several times, putting me really close to work and him half the distance to work. We both make good money for our age. We are both looking to advance our careers. Between us, making about $115,000 a year. The area we live in, Jackson, is not bad, but with recent drug and violence problems going on in the area, we don't want our children growing up there. Chelsea has good schools and daycare services. Chelsea also has a lot of medical field opportunities for my career. If the prices of housing in Chelsea were slightly more reasonable, it would make it easier for up-and-coming families that are still advancing their careers to have a chance at a decent environment to raise their children, lower fuel costs, more time with family, and a better quality of life. Thank you for your time, Danette.
Thank you.
I'm Joanne Ladio, Joanne L. on that list. And I am speaking wearing three different hats. One, I'm a smack-in-the-middle boomer, but I'm still working, but I'm looking at retirement. I am a caregiver. I take care of my partner who is very much disabled, and we live in town. I laugh and say in 1998 we got probably one of the last affordable houses in town. And we live in a very housing diverse neighborhood in terms of sizes and things. And my third hat that I wear is very much a proponent for diversity in the community. And I know that it involves, some of it is we don't have an extremely diverse community racially or ethnically, but that would involve people moving in, and I'm very sensitive to the fact there's no place for people to do that. And it has nothing to do with low-income housing. It's any housing. So the issues that I wanted to make sure that folks think about is that there's some of us in small, older houses, and it is a real challenge to adapt them for disabilities. We've done okay, but right now I have the challenge of I've got to make that final renovation to the bathroom, and finding contractors who are on the same planet with me in terms of price has been a real challenge. And so I would be happy to leave the small house, but at the same time, we can't afford the retirement communities in town. And I would love to see that there be an alternate, so that, and that's what my statement today is, we need to think creatively about housing. Things are changing. Kids don't necessarily want to come back to the 3-bedroom ranch. Some of the stuff going on in Detroit on a smaller scale could apply here, where they've got and I would love to see cooperative housing that's not out of sight, so that we've got shared spaces, but smaller spaces to live in. There's tiny houses that are just great. I live in a tiny house. I'd downsize a little bit more if I had a place that I could go to entertain or to cook or for community dinners. There's apartment buildings where you have, and even own is a small condo, but it's within the same building, but it's a smaller scale. I don't want to see isolation. Okay, the affordable housing is here, and the big people housing is here, and all the seniors live over here. That's not the age and income and just resource diversity. I don't want to live only around people my age or older. But there's ways that perhaps with creative zoning and legislation that younger people could be in adjoining apartments at a reduced rate in order to provide services for some older folks in the neighborhood. So I really would like us to think creatively and outside the box, because we can't afford the stick-built from-the-ground houses anymore. I know mobile homes is a real bad word, but they're affordable houses, and they allow some amount of independence, and they do make them for disabled people. And so I'll speak for the disabled community too, which really needs to be represented here as well. Yeah.
Ryan, thank you very much.
My name is Ryan Cumming, and I am reading a story from Marlena. I currently work in Chelsea. Me and my fiance are looking to tie the knot and would love to start a family not too shortly after. But with housing so expensive here in Chelsea, we will have to look for a cheaper area. We will most likely buy a house, and will have to be at least 30 minutes away, in the Jackson area. When that happens, we will most likely move jobs, because with the drugs and crime rates so high, we do not want to start our life and family in the Jackson area at all, so we will most likely be even further away from Chelsea, making us have to switch jobs. I love my job, so it breaks my heart, if I want to progress as an adult, that I will have to leave it. We are good people and want to make something of ourselves and of future children, and being able to possibly live and continue working in Chelsea would make me feel comfortable about starting a family, and I would know that my children have a better chance to be better than I am.
Next, thank you.
Hi, my name is Mackenzie, and I'm reading on behalf of Corey. I don't remember much about my housing search except for the obvious. There wasn't much, and what I found was expensive. There was that one duplex complex on the south side that started with a B. They occasionally had listings that went quickly and honestly looked like crap. Got Laura and Don's place for way too much money, $1,200 a month, because I didn't have another option. Ipsy was too far, Jackson was too far, and Gregory turned out to be a terrible idea, the assault. Got the trailer park situation, and it sufficed, but they stopped doing rentals, so that's out. Basically, the search for affordable housing was quick and fruitless.
Thank you. Joanne, thank you.
Hi, I'm Joanne Barheit, and I'm coming from a really different perspective, actually. Jane and I are friends, and we had lunch the other day. She did not tell me what to say. She did not prepare my remarks. But we were talking about what I was going to do, because one of my oldest son is applying to colleges now, and my younger son is not very far behind. We have a 3,000 square foot house in Chelsea, which would be way too big, right? It's actually too big for 4 of us. Can I say I can't keep it clean? But that's another story. But once our kids move out, that's definitely too big for us. However, our mortgage is going to be paid off quite soon, which is great, right? I'm on the complete other side of things. So once our mortgage is paid off, I thought, well, I don't really want to sell the house. I'd like to keep this. I'd like to keep this property, stay in this community. And so I was saying, well, we have a basement. We finished the house. It was unfinished when we moved in. We finished it. And we very specifically, when we did the basement, we made it so it could be like a mother-in-law apartment. I mean, we've been here like 16 years, and at the time we certainly didn't need a mother-in-law apartment. I just wanted some flexibility. We wanted value to the house so that someone could move in. We put in an escape hatch window, so it would be legal. We could throw up a wall and make a bedroom down there. It has a bathroom, a wet bar. So I said, well, you know, my husband and I maybe don't want to stick around. You know, right after the kids leave, we may want to move away, but still keep the house. So maybe our kids could come in and rent an apartment, have the upstairs, be there with renting rooms, have a whole separate apartment downstairs. And Jane said, well, you're not allowed to do that. And Chelsea, I said, what? So that's all I want. I want flexibility with what we have. I want to be able to stay in the community. The kids graduated from college, many of them can't go out and get their own places. So I'd love to have a little apartment downstairs with its own entrance where you're not, you know, there's some separation because your child is an adult now, but they have the ability, he can stay there and he can save to buy his own house, right? So I'm just looking for flexibility, and you know, we're members of the community, our kids are in Chelsea schools, you know, we own the house. We're concerned about property values, the community, all of that. So by us keeping the house, you know, we're still very concerned about who we would rent to, right? And that they would not destroy the house or anything like that. So that would be my perspective, that I would like from the other side to see more you know, the ability to have some diversity. And diversity. Can I say my son is on the freshman basketball team, and every team we play, our team is all white. The other teams, it's hard. It's hard. There's just not diversity in Chelsea. And I'd love to be able to rent to some of these people who were saying that they can't find a place to live in Chelsea.
Thank you. Is there anyone else here? Jason, yes, absolutely. Good, thank you.
Thank you. Morning. Quite a number of powerful stories here this morning. It's been a great event so far. My name is Jason Maciejewski. I live in Dexter Township, and I want to just communicate really quickly a story about maybe the power of coming to a meeting and making public comment, or coming to a town hall like this and having your voice heard. I served for 2 terms on the Dexter Township Board as a trustee, and near the end of that time, there was a proposal that came up to the board for a very large piece of farmland out off of North Territorial Road, proposed to be developed into a subdivision, many of which we've seen these type of subdivisions built out in townships in our area before. So the question rose, there needed to be a rezoning done. And we went through a process of evaluating the property and things like that. But at the end of the day, my role on the board was to maybe ask some questions about infrastructure, what this development, this particular property meant for diversity in our township, the type of housing. I would like to see out in the townships a little bit more diversity rather than the same $300,000 or $400,000 or $500,000 homes that you typically see. So we began to ask some questions about that. If you live in Dexter Township out in that area and you have to commute through Dexter to get into work, you know what it's like to have to wait in line to get through the train tunnel every morning. You waited 20, sometimes 30 minutes to get through on occasion. So this development would have added another 90 houses, another potentially 180 individuals trying to get through that one lane every morning. And also the issue of affordable housing. In our township, everything that's being built, again, is these hundreds of thousands of dollars of homes out in our area. So we did have a group of citizens that came and expressed their opinions about this, and maybe that we should think differently. The Township Board and the Planning Commission should think differently about the types of houses that are being built. So ultimately, that project hasn't gone forward at this point. The developer, I think, is still considering his options, but there was a sense among some of the board members at that time of maybe doing some type of different kind of development. And out of that arose a citizens' effort, a petition drive in our township to put on the ballot a millage question to preserve land out in Dexter Township. And so maybe that will be considered in the future as well. But I want to stress how important it is and how great it is to have such a turnout today at your event. The simple task it may seem, just to go to a board meeting or a planning commission meeting and express your opinion and let the elected officials know what you think about the housing in your community. So I wanted to mention that because it's really important to me to make sure people get out and express their opinion.
Good. Thank you so much, Jason.
Thank you, Jason.
All right. All right. Oh, there we go. Great. Thank you.
Hey, hi, I'm Wendy Carty-Saxon with Avalon Housing, and I appreciate the opportunity to be out here. Avalon's a nonprofit. We're out of Ann Arbor and Washington County. We develop, manage, and own and provide services for supportive housing. So we grew out of the local emergency shelter back in '92. So on the spectrum of affordable housing, as Nancy said, we're really focused on the folks who are the extremely low income, have a lot of needs as well. So it's a mix of housing and services that go with it. We have 24 properties now, 282 units, and our latest are in Chelsea at Sharon Ann Apartments. We're very excited about that. Faith in Action approached us about the great need for housing in Chelsea. And we run around, looked at a number of different properties, and this was the one that really seemed to be able to work. When we start with it, we look at who we're going to house and how much they can afford. And people talked about 200% of poverty or 100% of poverty. At 30% of income, that's about $600 a month, and 200% or $300 a month if you're living at 100% of poverty. So if you have any sense of rents or housing payments, you can see what gap there is there. So in looking at sort of where the funding is, we're able to identify that and bring in vouchers for those units and the tenants, which is pay 30% of their income. But even with that, it's 17 units, we're thrilled about it, but the need is gigantic, and the need for family units, and we haven't yet been able to figure out how to bridge that gap with the family units. So I just wanted to touch on that and say we really appreciate the range of affordable housing needs, and just as you said, really figuring out where you're looking to impact the spectrum in different ways. So
Thank you very much. What she just mentioned is an important percentage. For those of us who have mortgages, anybody ever tried to get a mortgage using 60% of your income? Right? So if you put anything into a mortgage calculator, if you put anything in there, kind of the standard around that is 30% or less. You're unlikely to get a mortgage if you're going to have to commit more than 30% of your monthly income to your housing payment. And that's kind of been the standard over time, is that about a third of your income for housing. Back in the day, food was relatively more expensive, 30% of your income then for food and utilities, and then 30% for your car, your upkeep, your food, and your clothing and those. So the idea of someone thinking about with the income they have, about 30% of that is dedicated towards housing is kind of a standard we've used since the 1940s and before to say that's kind of the ratio that a healthy household stays within. So when you're looking at folks who are looking at committing 60% of their household income to housing, that's kind of out of line with what, over time, as Americans, we found to be strong household budgeting practices. So with that sums up our testimonial. So we are going to try and keep on track, which means Teresa, sorry, I lost it, there you are. So now we're going to welcome Teresa Gelati, and I'm going to say, did I say your last name correctly? Yeah. Yeah. I didn't have it in front of me. She's from Washington County, and she's just going to talk about what are some of the different ideas out there around diversity in housing. Sizes, types, what that can look like. I'm really going to try and keep you to 11:30 so we have a full half an hour for question and answer.
I can do it.
Okay, that's important. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much. Good morning. Thanks so much to Donna and Jane for inviting me out here. My name is Teresa Gelati, and I work with the Washington County Office of Community and Economic Development. We get to work with great partners like Avalon Housing and Habitat for Humanity on housing projects throughout the county. And so I'm just really happy to be here today. So I want to be reiterating lots of things that were talked about today, so bear with me. But Donna just did this, and it's so perfect.
Apologize.
You know, the general idea of what is affordable around housing is that you're spending 30% of your gross income on housing.
Just one quick second. I knew I left something out of a household budget. That was taxes. Gross household income.
Well, and that's important because when we're talking about that 30%, if you're a renter, you're paying for your utilities out of that. If you're a homeowner, it's your taxes, your mortgage, your insurance. So think about it whether we're talking about renter or homeowner. If you're over 30%, we talk about that being a housing cost burden. Because you're going to have struggle then to cover other costs like education, food, clothing, medical bills, all those other things in life that we try and take care of. So that's what we generally think about. Another way to look at it that's been talked about more and I think is really appropriate here in Western Washtenaw is including your transportation cost in with your housing cost, because where do you have to go to school? Where are you going for your job? We already heard about a 2-hour commute to and from work. So if we are including transportation and housing together, we're talking about not exceeding 45% of your income. So that's another way to look at it, and I think it's important, especially with people who are commuting Ann Arbor, Dearborn, Detroit, Jackson, wherever you're going for your jobs on a day-to-day basis. So I'm throwing out this term called inclusionary housing, which I stole from Ferndale. I like how they talked about it, but it's thinking about all the different types of housing you might need for all the different people who live or want to live in your community. And so thinking about that, why do we need it? Because, and we've heard a story of this right now, that as you have increased housing costs, you're pushing people out of your community that want to live there, that want to live and work or be a part of your community. So we hear about that already. We've had testimonials. And it impacts people with all across the board, but especially families and seniors that end up on fixed incomes. Those increased costs can push employees out, which we've also heard. I'm so glad this is all lining up, by the way. So that impacts the reliability of the workforce for employers, right? How long does it take you to get to your job? What if you have a problem with your car, your transportation issues, you have a sick child? It's just going to make it harder for you to get to your job regularly if you're not closer. And then there's also congestion. That's, I know, a problem in some places, not everywhere, but if you have a lot of people commuting in at the same time of day, that could become a problem. Hopefully that's not a problem yet. The general best practice is trying to provide a variety of housing types, right? So all different types of housing. You've got your detached single-family house, you've got duplexes, you've got triplexes, you've got apartment buildings, you've got lofts or second-story apartments over first-floor commercial. You've got a variety of housing types, and they're not just in your downtown. There's a variety of types in your neighborhoods. There's a variety of sizes of those types, because then you'll hit different price points, right, throughout your community. And the goal of all of this is that you end up with a mixed income community. You end up with a variety of housing types that will help you find a place to live at different times of your life. When you are a single person, when you have a larger family, or you're living with friends, when you're older, when you want to age in place. If you have an issue or a disability, we talked about having to do some modifications to homes if you have to allow for different types of access. So we want to be able to allow for all those stages and for it to be multi-generational. So that's kind of that's the ideal state that we'd like to do. And it takes a lot of different types of housing types to get there. But before we get into the housing types, we've already talked about this a little bit. And while we've heard a little bit from others about 100%, 200% of the poverty line, in the housing world, a lot of times we talk about area median income. So we look at the county, and the middle income, absolute midpoint, is the median income, right? And then below that, there's percentages above and below. Right now, we're looking at a single person in Washtenaw County, and Washtenaw County has a very high area median income, one of the highest in the state. And at somebody, a single person, at 100% of the area median income makes about $61,000. Now, 80%, 50%, 30% are the other three bands there. All of those in the world of housing could be subsidized housing for those households. That's something that could happen, but these are some of the jobs at those different income bands. So at 100% right in the middle, we have a special education teacher, a secondary school teacher, fire building inspectors, police officers, kind of in the middle. As we get in lower income bands, at 80% maintenance workers, mental health practitioners, physical therapist assistants, social services. At 50% of the area median income, a Washtenaw County office assistant would fall there, a bus driver, substitute teacher, pharmacy technicians, someone you see at your local pharmacy, and then 30% of the area median income, a coffee shop barista, restaurant host, food prep and servers, cashiers, and then actually in the 50 and 30% we see a lot of jobs in the food sector and the service sector that are paying kind of those low salaries. And these are all working folks. So then when you translate that and you say, okay, what would 30% of that income be? What could you pay for in rent or a mortgage? And we heard some great examples already. So when we're talking about these lower bands, I mean, $465 a month, like to rent, that's going to be real hard to find something if you're not going to be living with multiple people or some other scenario. But even to try and think about a down payment or a mortgage, it's going to be really hard for people that are working, maybe multiple jobs, to get to the point where they'd be able to buy a house in our area. So just another way to kind of look at some of the similar topics we've been talking about. So what can we do to try and provide different housing types, more housing? So I want to kind of talk about different types of housing types that create options. And Jane had kept talking about people that we wanted to find housing for, and she was referring to them as missing middle, which was amazing to me because for housing, we often talk about a missing middle housing type. So it's just amazing that they lined up. And it's different types of housing, so not just the extreme of multifamily and the extreme of detached single-family housing. There's a lot in the middle that gives us a lot of variety. So I don't know if you can see that kind of down in the middle. We've got duplexes, triplexes, courtyard apartments, bungalows, townhouses, all sorts of things that kind of fall in the middle of those two extremes. And a couple other ones include accessory dwelling units that would go with a single-family house. We talked about that already with a granny flat or mother-in-law suite. We'll talk about it a little bit more. And then the potential for a live-work unit is another combination that we could be looking at. So I'm going to start in the single-family world and talk about accessory dwelling units. I will show my age to say the first time I ever learned about this was watch Happy Days. Fonzie lives above the garage, right? So he lived in an accessory dwelling unit, so granny flat, mother-in-law suite, growing pains too for any other TV watchers. Okay, so that's what that is, right? So it can be done a couple different ways. The first one on the left is that you can do that second unit maybe within the existing building. You heard that example of maybe converting a basement, right? Or maybe you have a kind of a Four Seasons room that could eventually be a second unit or something like that. The second one is an addition to your house that you would have a separate entrance and make it a separate unit. And then the third one is like above the garage, right? That kind of thing, that there's a detached building, you would have a second unit within that. So these are an option that fit in nicely within a single family neighborhood because oftentimes you don't even know that there is a second unit there. So it's nice because it fits in with the neighborhood. You're using existing infrastructure, right? So you're not building a new subdivision that needs water and sewer and streets. That's all there. You're connecting right to all that infrastructure. It responds to changing family needs. So if it is truly the mother-in-law, there's a space for it. If it's the son or the daughter coming back from school but wants a little independence. We've also heard a lot from the disability community that sometimes there's people in the family with or friends with developmental disabilities that need the independence, but they want to keep folks kind of close so they can provide some supports. So a combination of that independent and supports within the house. And it also is a great thing for people who need a little bit of rental income. So when we've talked about this before, we've had seniors say, I want to downsize, but I want to stay in my neighborhood. and they've offered to live in the accessory unit and rent the main house, and then actually have an income that helps them continue to pay taxes and stay in their community. So it's an interesting way to do an investment. Of course, you can stay in the main house too. I'm not saying you have to go in a smaller place if you want to have an accessory unit. But the rental income sometimes is maybe all you need to stay where you are. So that's another way to look at it as well. Just some examples. The one on the left is from Portland, top left. This is in Grand Rapids above a garage. And then this is an addition in Ann Arbor, which is just sort of in the back of the building. So different ways to kind of look at how they are in real life. And kind of similar, moving into duplexes and triples or triplexes. And I find this interesting because I used to live in Milwaukee back in the day, and I love these. I was in a bungalow on the second floor, so I always think of them as top and bottom, but a lot of people don't think of them next to each other, that there's two next to each other. Basically, they're attached. Sometimes it's just a building that has, it's set up, it's divided, maybe it was designed that way, like the one on the second one. In some cases, it's a house that's big enough that has been converted, an existing structure is converted. So one of the things as we think about these, think about how we can adapt existing structures, existing neighborhoods, and then think about new, when we have new sort of neighborhoods being proposed, new subdivisions, is there diversity within that too? Because it can apply in both ways. The third one down there is sort of a triple in a row, left to right. So mansions with apartments. So this is another thing that would deal with an existing structure most likely, where you have a very large, beautiful building, usually old building, hard to maintain. Someone was talking about, oh, it was you, converting the old house and spending all that time and energy in an older building. So another way to address that would be to potentially allow for units within that. The one on the left is got, I believe it's 11 units, and it's like 7,000 square feet or something like that. So in some cases, you may have an older building that you want to save that's very large, and one of the options would be to think about apartments within those units. So townhouses and row houses are another way to think about this. Again, this is sort of a series in a row. I think in this picture, the best example, I have to walk and point a lot, I'm sorry, is over here where you can see them sort of lined up. Again, they can be top and bottom or left and right, but it's that they are attached. Baltimore is one place I always think of when I think of row houses as well. The nice thing about it is that construction-wise, they're a little bit cheaper. There are shared walls. The ownership can be rental. It can be home ownership. You have a lot of flexibility that way. Live-work unit. So this is kind of a fancy live-work scenario. But this is a lot of the traditional sort of downtowns where somebody had a small shop, they lived upstairs, there's ability to do that. In some cases it's a little different now where it's maybe production and a little bit of retail, but you're doing it and then you live right above it. So allowing that flexibility. But the trick is, how do you allow this flexibility? A lot of it is through your planning and zoning, right? So as you're doing master planning in your community, are you saying that you have these goals for different types of housing to include inclusionary housing, right? So that you're allowing it lots of different types in all your different neighborhoods. So then when you go and do your zoning, that you don't just have districts that's all single family housing. Maybe they also allow duplexes. Maybe they allow for accessory dwelling units. Those are the types of things that you would have to change through your planning and policy that so you can allow some of these other housing types in your community. So Jane can't say on the side, by the way, you can't do that in your basement. She'll be able to say, yes, you can. Here's how you do it. So actually, before we go through that, one thing I wanted to talk about besides housing types is how things are owned, different ownership models. And some people talked about that as well. Thank you. So we've got owner, we've got renter, but condo, of course, but cooperative housing, right? That's another model. Co-housing is another. So you've got a few things to think about. Housing types, what type of product you're building, but then what's the different type of ownership or rental model that's available so that there's flexibility as well. All right. So I talked a little bit about this. How do we provide for that? Are we allowing in our planning and zoning for that? So I did a quick look at the census last night on the Western Washtenaw. I'm a little bit of a nerd. I like my census data. And in all the townships in western Washtenaw, more than 90% of the built units are detached single-family houses, right? I'm glad you're shaking your head, nodding your head, so I got that right. In the cities and villages, it's a little bit different. We're talking about 60% detached or 65, 70, so there's a little more variety, right? We see that in the downtowns and some of the neighborhoods and the older parts of town in particular. So that's something we need to look at, right? So we don't have as much flexibility maybe that we need. So what percent of zoning is detached, single family only? Is that most of the areas where you can develop? If a developer came to town tomorrow and said, I want to do a new neighborhood that has some single family houses, various sizes, some townhomes, a couple duplexes, that sort of thing, can I build it? And you're like, I don't have a place you can put it. Like, that's something we need to know and be able to check, because if they can't come in and do that, even if we wanted it, we might not be able to build it, right? So those are the kinds of things, like where are these different types of housing types allowed? Is it just in your downtown that you can have mixed use, where you can have commercial and then residential above, or maybe a duplex or a triplex? Is that it? That's a small part of our area. We don't have a lot of areas to build, so we want to think about maybe expanding that throughout. The other thing is sort of, I'm talking about sort of inclusionary, but are there practices that are excluding? So do you have, for example, lot sizes that are very large, so you can only do one house on maybe a half-acre lot, so that all that land is being used maybe for one house, which it could be used for 10 houses or townhomes. So that's the other piece of it to look at, is if your planning and zoning is sort of really limiting what you can do. So it's kind of looking at both sides of that piece. The other piece of it is kind of on the policy side. So if your zoning does allow for some of these options, are you helping to incentivize them? Is your staff and your elected officials and your leaders in the community really asking developers to do that? Are you sort of hinting, yeah, we'd really like to see more. We'd love for you, when you build this new subdivision, to allow for accessory dwelling units above your garages. Just build those in now. That would be great. So people have to kind of be on the same page and connected that you want to move forward with this, so it gets through to your development community, to the banking community that might be like, oh, this is a slightly different type of housing product. How do I finance that? So these are the kinds of conversations that all have to happen if you want to move forward in that way. And I think I made it in time. So this is my contact information. If you want to get a hold of me, and this is just a drawing of a new community that's being proposed with some townhomes and some small cottage and single-family houses and all that kind of stuff.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you very much, Teresa. So again, today was not to solve anything. Today is the opening conversation of this type. We know lots of conversations are already going on in Chelsea, but the idea was to hear from a bunch of perspectives, to share some information, to let you meet some folks in the audience. So I do want to acknowledge that we have our new mayor here. Want to stand up for us? And we'll let you down. We have Peter on the city council as well. We have our county commissioner, Ken Kratz-Martinez. Do we have any other elected officials in the, and newly elected, Rick Catherman on the Chelsea City Council. Anyone else? Okay, yes.
Kristen Van Rees from the school board.
Oh, thank you very much. So you have lots of folks in the room who are also hearing the same things that we're all hearing the stories, and who are very important in the decision-making process of what Western Washtenaw looks like going forward. And I really do think we need to acknowledge that in that process of looking forward and saying, where do we want to be, Chelsea is the leader in Western Washtenaw County, right? Chelsea has consistently established 20-year plans, look-forward plans. I mean, now we feel like it's about the Purple Rose has been here forever, and the downtown has been as healthy and vibrant forever. But that was all done very intentionally by the Chelsea community. And the map that was up there for so long, Chelsea's city limits really aren't that large. And so it's people in Sylvan and Linden and Lima Township who all feel like they are Chelsea, right? Chelsea's broader, as Jane said at the beginning, than just the city limit boundaries. And so it's all of us working together. It's the townships, it's Dexter Township, it's Webster Township, it's the city of Dexter, looking at what is community writ large and how do we want to live and thrive together. We have a unique burden of being successful in the state of Michigan. It's actually kind of one of those burdens. You kind of want to stay how you are and keep everything that we have and keep it as lovely and beautiful as it is. But as Trin pointed out at the beginning, we're at a crossover point. We're aging. And I think that we do want families and children and full schools in our town as well, because that's part of our fabric, of our community. And so with that, I'd like to open it up to questions and answers. We have our panelists here to answer questions. We have our mayor. We have to begin with.
Just a quick comment. I think it's a really important point that Chelsea does have finite boundaries, and it is sort of a collective, and that also means we have finite land. So it is really important that we look a little bit more broadly in terms of Western Washtenaw. But I just do want to mention that recently the City of Chelsea established a Housing Research Advisory Committee. And I just do want to point out that the two council members, Peter Feeney and Rick Catherman, are here, and that there will be a posting. It will be a 7-member community to look at many of the things we talked about today, but there will be a posting on our website for 3 at-large members as well.
Will those be limited to
Housing Research
city?
Committee.
Correct.
Yep.
The Housing Research Committee will be
city.
looking for at-large members.
That's just for city members, not for
For the
community.
city of Chelsea.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Melissa. We were going to mention that in call to action, but since you did that, let me tell you what other things that you could possibly do as a call to action piece from this this meeting. So as I spoke about, it's really important that you contact your local municipality. So if you're in the city of Chelsea, as Melissa mentioned, there is a new housing research advisory committee that's being put together, and as Nancy mentioned, it is limited to city residents. However, there's plenty of folks in this room and beyond that are interested in talking about housing in a broader, more regional way. And that conversation starts with you going back to Dexter Township or the city of Dexter or Lima or Linden or Sylvan or whoever, and talking to them about what's happening at the municipal level now. Who's doing what? How do you get involved? How do we have a regional conversation? So we want you to plug into what's already happening, and if nothing is already happening, there are multiple people in this room and beyond that are interested in having that conversation. The other note, well, that's enough for now.
Okay. Thanks. Let's open it up to questions and answers. Anyone got a question or comment? Would you mind coming up? Or, okay. We've got a larger room, so make it easier. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jeff Cowell. I'm a 25-year resident of Dexter Township. And boy, does this resonate. My wife and I are boomers who grew up in Detroit. Our first house, our first apartment was paid for, was an investment from the Society of Automotive Engineers. It was fully funded as an investment by that organization to help encourage growth with professionals in Detroit. Our first house that we bought was built by Ford Motor Company in 1903, okay, in order to house an executive at their then brand new plant. When we moved here, we bought our house from a millwright at GM Hydromatic in Willow Run, okay. My son grew up, who's in the audience, my son grew up going to school with kids whose parents worked at the Chrysler proving ground. They're all gone, okay? We have moved in our generation from corporations driving urban development, okay, investing in the communities, and when business needs changed, moved on, which is their right, okay? What's happening here is that we have an opportunity, and one of the most attractive things about the Chelsea area is that we have organizations like this, meetings like this, where we are trying to take the responsibility for defining who we are, what kind of a community we want to be, okay? So, to me, this is a civic responsibility, and we're beginning to vision. I love it.
Good.
Okay?
Thank you.
Very
Do you have
good.
a question for us, or?
How can we engage, how can we change the discussion from affordable housing, which I truly believe and agree with you, that is completely related to the life cycle, of everybody. We're 65. We're looking to downsize. We want to do that, right? How can we change the affordable housing discussion to exactly what you said, right? Visioning what we want this town to look like. Do we want our kids to move back? Okay, do we want to have the entire spectrum of services? It isn't about who are not. And lastly, we weren't always gentrified, but boy, are we gentrified now. We're already there, and we've done it without collapsing. That's amazing.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you.
Do you want to ask your question here or there?
I'm Kathy Gorley from Lima Township, and I'm interested in co-housing and cooperative housing because for myself actually. But I'm aging. I like nature, but I also want to be in community, especially as it gets more difficult to drive. So I heard about a co-housing community near northwest of Ann Arbor off of Pure River Drive, and I wonder if anyone knows about that or knows about the challenges of developing co-housing.
I know in the 52nd House District near Zeeb Road in Jackson, there is Sun House co-housing community there. Sunward, excuse me. And then there's actually 2 or 3 right in a row off Park Road there at Zeeb and Jackson, really close to there. It's been there, gosh, at least 15 years, I'm going to say. I don't know much about the challenges. That's why we have the experts. Are there challenges around co-housing?
I'll try. So my
Could you explain what co-housing is to folks?
Sure. So co-housing is a group of potential owners working together to develop a property. Usually there's individualized space, separate units, and then sort of community space that's shared, as well as some of the cost. And then often within the co-housing, there's sort of a lifestyle where you share chores, such as people take turns making dinner, in some cases share chores around childcare, maintenance, gardening, those sorts of things. It all depends on the group that comes together to do the co-housing on sort of some of those terms. One of the things that I think is the challenging is to have a group that's willing to start it and kind of come together and figure out what they want, find a developer that will work with them, find the land, so it's sort of extra steps to do so. It's kind of hard to retrofit an existing development to fit it, so you have to kind of start from the beginning. So it takes a pretty committed group to sort of make it happen. Is my basic understanding, but if others want to add to it, I'm happy to hear it.
Why can't you retrofit a collection, a couple of old houses together?
You could potentially, I guess.
I mean, that's like creative thinking, that we've got to look outside the box a little bit.
I think a lot of people want to sort of fashion it themselves too, so it may be depending on who's involved.
No, I mean, related to that, we seem to be able to produce bed and breakfasts out of our mansions, but we can't do co-housing with it.
Okay. All right, so you're saying mansions were moving to bed and breakfasts, but they will, I think the mansion example you had was putting multiple units inside of a mansion. Is that what you're thinking?
Or cooperative might work better.
Or cooperative. Okay, excellent.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. My name is Patrick Ziske.
It really is easier.
I don't think microphones that often.
That's right.
My name is Patrick Ziske. I actually kind of moved to Chelsea partly because of affordable housing. I bought a foreclosure here in 2008 for a really, really good deal back when there wasn't affordable housing. Good old days. Not that I only want those good old days to come back for other people, but we talk about seniors living in their homes, and eventually they have to sell. I mean, it gets to a point. There's going to be a lot of homes on the market at some point, so those good old days in some fashion will come back. It's just maybe in a disorderly way. That's not what I really came to talk about, though. I'm also involved in a project to do something like co-housing, to develop a piece of land that I own just about a mile west of Chelsea. And it kind of overlaps a lot of the issues that we talk about here about what would bring young people back at a reasonable price point, what would interest them, and also what's ecologically responsible. Look at this as kind of the one I'm working on, I'm looking as kind of a residential integrated agricultural development of the future, which is ecologically responsible. A lot of the young people that are getting into agriculture these days, and they're getting into community at the same time. And I guess the reason why I mentioned this, not just for awareness, there's a lot of people who are interested in this, but some of the challenges that we have coming up are when you do something unconventional, every process step is harder because people don't know exactly what it is. They don't know how to handle it. You know, if you're doing a cookie cutter subdivision, they don't do. You put roads there, you put sewer lines in there, whatever. But when you're doing something like an off-grid community with straw bale and stuff like that, and you want to do composting toilets, let's say, which are well-known ecologically responsible choices, but not comfortable choices for a lot of people who do this every day. So I guess my main concern is looking ahead with all these challenges that we face, which is the building department, some zoning issues too, because a lot of places you can't build a tiny house because they're too small. A lot of these are environmental health at the county level and so forth. Construction agency, if you want to do something unconventional with natural building materials, as we do. Is there a focus at some level on partnering, championing, or navigating through some of these process steps? A lot of times we have an affordable housing development which is developed by somebody's idea on top. They say, well, we're going to have somebody build this. But what about the people who want to come in and have a vision like myself? Is there a way to connect into the process more easily?
I think you have some of the right people in the room to get contact information or to bring that, to put that on the radar. I think that's something that feeds into planning processes at cities and townships. Is it in the city limits of Chelsea, or is it in the township?
It's in Sylvan Township.
It's in Sylvan
About
Township.
a mile from the city.
Do we have any Sylvan Township officials here by any chance? Okay, so you didn't, you're elected, correct?
Well, I was hired. I replaced Roy Schmidt.
Oh, okay.
So I'm Cindy Chvara, trustee of Sylvan Township.
So can we make sure we to hook you two up before?
Yes.
We know each other.
Oh, we know each other, probably. So I tell you what, I understood about 3 of the 4 words you said when you were describing what you were planning on doing. Straw bale, not exactly sure what that is. Composting toilet used one at Leslie Science Center previously. So,
that's a good point, because it's actually at the county level where I don't know quite as many of the people.
Okay, well good. Well then we'll hook you up with Teresa.
Megan is a planner.
Megan?
Hi, I'm Megan Masson-Minnock. I've been a planning consultant since 2000, and I've worked in thousands of communities around the state and many here in Washington County. I live in Scioto Township and have for the past 14 years. So kind of answer your question broadly, one of the things is that really for the past 100 years in our country, a lot of times either explicitly or implicitly, we've used the local zoning, state laws and federal laws we've used them to quash our fears. So we've used them to say, no, we don't want those people here. Really, and kind of one of my questions to the panel is, but I have a comment before I'm going to ask that. So one of those laws, in my personal opinion, is the State Rental Act. And what that does is it explicitly states you can't have rent control in the state of Michigan. But it's been interpreted that any voluntary controls where someone comes to the city of Chelsea and says, hey, or the city of Chelsea says, hey, we'll bend this rule for you, and then you provide some affordable housing. But municipal attorneys or attorneys on the developer side have interpreted to say that state law says you can't do that. So, Representative Lasinski, there is SB 110, which includes a voluntary inclusionary, a voluntary ability for developers to have that. So look that up, SB 110, if you're serious about this on the state level. The second thing is my question is for folks up here in the panel, if you could speak to it. What is the best way, or either have you found as an advocate, an activist, a pastor, or elected official, to help craft legislation that really gets to our better selves and what our community should be and wants to be? And what helps you to do that from people who, like the people in the room here today?
All right, does anybody want to take that?
I think personally in the world that we live in today, we live in a society where we hear from the higher ups and everything how things should be. And they drive it into our heads, whether right or wrong. And sometimes it's repeated over and over and over again until we as human beings take it in and we become numb to what's happening in the real world. And what I find as far as being an advocate for social justice and things that are right in this world, when you confront someone who has that other side of the spectrum, which I do on a daily basis, ask the question why. Why do you feel that? Why do you feel like we don't want those people here in Chelsea? Why do you feel like they should go to Jackson or wherever? And keep asking why. And keep asking and dig in deeper until you can maybe expose that issue, that problem, that underlying thing, perhaps something in their life, why they feel that way. Just don't take it on and as a confront them and you're going to fight it. If you ask the question why and dig in, you will expose in them different things in their virtue of their heart and their soul that will come out in that. So I encourage you, when you face that, keep asking that question why and get to the thing behind the thing and expose that. And we can change, and trust me, as a community and as a family, one thing human beings don't like to do is change. But you can. Trust me, as we have some other pastors in this church, try changing something in a church. Moving something from here to there. But it can happen. So I encourage you to be open and ask those questions why and get to the root of what the issue is.
And just really quickly, as a Catholic who had the Mass change on her, that's about a decade ago, I still flub the words to the response every now and again.
So just me quickly, I mean, I feel like this is the soapbox that I drag around these days. Be engaged, right? So as an elected official, I think your question was, what's the best way to help craft legislation that speaks to our better selves? Remind your legislators that they have better selves, right? Remind them. Come to the meeting to put your red flags up and say, we're watching and we want you to remember that you can do this, but then support them. Support those decisions that they're making. That includes coming out en masse to just sit in the meeting and nod your head and be, I have your back. And then keep them accountable for their better self decisions. I mean, we have opportunities to do that. They're called elections. We need to use that.
Thank you very much. Okay, but I'm going to circle back around to your zoning question and to a comment you made about zoning and to your comment, our very first gentleman coming up. So in the 1950s, right, we had more planned communities, and it was kind of in that 1945, 1950 that we really defined what we currently view as the American dream. And that was a single-family house with a backyard to raise your kids in. And I think what we're going through right now, as we're now in a new century. Whoa. Okay. All right, we're just going to roll with it. What we're really doing now is we're kind of redefining what does that American dream look like. And as our population ages, that third of life is looking different for seniors. We might just turn that off. All right, well, we're very close to the end. And what our young people see as their future looks a little bit different, right? My mother and mother-in-law couldn't drink at their wedding, right? Legally. that's not what it looks like when young people marry and start their families anymore, right? They're starting that at different points in their lives. So we're kind of redefining what the American dream looks like. And a lot of our zoning in our communities were set up very intentionally to suit what was viewed as the American dream in the 1945s and 50s. And so conversations like this are exactly what we as community leaders and as your elected officials want to hear, is what does the American dream look like to you today? As parents with kids in college, as young starting families, as folks who are in that third. And our zoning and our community needs to reflect that. And to the point about visioning and thinking about where we want to go forward. This is terrific, and this is the input, but next comes the hard work of the research and the study, and who has the income, and where do we put that, and what land is available, and how do we look at it. Community conversations are what feed those processes, but it is really, really hard work then to take this and put it on paper in an actionable, meaningful way that we can actually move forward and towards a vision.
So I just wanted to share kind of a different perspective. Many of you know that I am a first-generation refugee from Vietnam. My family left in 1975 at the end of the war. So I've always worn both kind of an Asian and a Western cultural mindset. And I have to say that in an Asian cultural mindset, it's very normal for all of us to live in extended families. Grandparents, parents, children, and that was always the expectation. But wearing my Western hat and having kids, I mean, the goal that you're kind of always raised or you're kind of pressured to think about is to send your kids off to college so they live on their own. Because otherwise, if you haven't done that, you've failed as a parent. Right. And I hear that often, both from seniors and from younger people, that if they're back home living with their parents or living with their grandparents, it's said with some chagrin. And I think it's a whole cultural mindset to think about that differently, about living together in extended families, whether we call it co-housing, whether we pass legislation for it, or whether we just do it as part of a natural process. And I hear some of our seniors are thinking about that a little bit differently now as well. I do know one of our seniors recently told me a story about how he had a house, wanted to downsize, but it wasn't big enough for his daughter, who has 4 kids, to move in with them. So he sold his house, they bought a house together, and so now they live together. He's got the space he needs. They share the resources. The kids and the grandkids can all live together. And I just applauded him. I think that's how I was used to thinking about how families should grow and age together in a community. So I think it's somewhat of a cultural mindset that I hope will eventually take hold and shift, because I think then we can really make some change as well, both in legislation and advocacy.
Excellent, thank you. And we've got time maybe for 1 to 2 short questions. Here, and then I'll come to you.
Thank you. I'm wearing 2 hats here today. I live in the city of Chelsea. I moved here 30 years ago when it was still a village. I live in town, and I totally understand what everybody's comment has been. I've seen it all here. But I happen to work in Manchester, and like Nancy, I'm the director at our small human service agency that serves not only the village of Manchester, but the 4 surrounding townships. And I'm sure most of you remember from the map that Trent showed, Freedom Township was red, and Manchester Township was orange. And I just feel like my question to you, Donna, is you've been talking Western Washtenaw County, but really focusing on Chelsea and Dexter areas. Don't forget about those townships, because those folks aren't necessarily the ones that are going to come to a meeting like this, but they still need to be included in that conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, we've been really excited. When we started a year ago, I think, Becca, we had 7 people at our first meeting at the Manchester Library, and we had well over 20 the last time we met. So we've been really working on drawing folks out of their comfort zone to come and share their views. Because it does. I mean, when you get to Freedom Township, I think you have 1,200 homesteads in the entire township, 36 square miles. So, yeah, you really have to reach deep to make sure. So thank you very much for that reminder. One last question, and then we'll wrap it up. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Michael Cunningham. He's my dad. I've also lived here for 25 years, and I have a sort of specific use question, because I remember when I was a kid, there used to be some trailers right by Sylvan Apartments. And I also remember when the Pulte development happened. I remember some of the unfortunate timing with that, and if I recall, there's still some unused plots in that area. So I hear, more generally, I hear some discussion about what new development can be done, but I can also think of the developments that were never finished and the land that was planned for use or was in use but is now just barren. And is there anything specifically that can be done with those lots that were meant for housing but just aren't being used?
I'm going to have to punt that to the local officials. Would you like to try that? Sure.
So the Pulte homes, also known as Heritage Point, is actually the first 1 to 2A are built out. So all the lots are sold right now. So there are additional phases for 3 to 5 that has an ongoing plan with the Planning Commission. So it is an opportunity for you to continue to give input because they renew it annually. Part of that was driven by funding. As the economy went south, so did some of the building developments, right? It's tied to funding. In terms of, are you talking about the space next to Jiffy Mixes in Sharon Mills, or Sharon Hills? That's what I'm
Sharon Hills, yeah. Well,
Sharon Hills,
Sharon,
thank you. I believe that lot was purchased by Jiffy Mix, and that they're continuing to expand it, and they are an important employer of our city. So.
Thank you.
All right, so
yep, we'll have one.
So Jeff, Michael, right? Just to add to that, Melissa and Rick and Pete and I on the council, we have, as part of the annual visioning and master planning and looking into the future, we are tasked with trying to keep an eye on what growth options or potential growth. I think it was future land use, is that what's called on the map? So we need to look at that, and there are developments that ring the borders of our community, of the Chelsea city border, right? And that's why it's so important that we're able to have conversations among townships and within regions so that we can look at this stuff as a whole, collectively, and because our needs are collective. And if we're making decisions in silos, we're not doing the best job to address the region's needs. So, at risk of just sounding completely repetitive, go talk to your townships, talk to your municipalities and say, we want you to be working in tandem with other communities in your area.
Well, thank you very much. So I would very much like to thank our panel members and we give them all. Thank you, Teresa, for coming to give us. So as per usual, thank you very much for coming. Hopefully you've all received a postcard in the mail about upcoming town hall coffee hours. And there's on the table in front to take out if you would like one. And we're adding a new feature called Drafts with Donna. All right, so we're going to try and do 2 instead of coffee hours. See if we attract a little bit different crowd over here. So please join us. I know I'll be sticking around. I think our panelists and we'll stick around and answer questions that you have. And hopefully some of our elected officials as well, sitting around for a few minutes if you have a specific question you'd like to ask. But thank you so much for coming. I appreciate it. Thank you.